So, could Ninja Theory make a 60 FPS performance mode for Hellblade 2 on Xbox Series X, a game that's currently limited to just 30 FPS, albeit with some of the best graphics of this console generation? Well, that's where I come in, with a bit of theory crafting based on our Frankenstein's console. We're going to be running the PC version of Hellblade 2 on a PC built from the AMD 4800S desktop kit, which is literally using the Xbox Series X CPU paired with 16 gigs of GDDR6 memory, just like the console, along with the Radeon RX 6700 10 gig and RDNA 2 GPU that performs very much like the PS5's GPU because architecturally it's very similar. And as we've seen in so many cross-platform comparisons, well, PS5's graphics power is close to Series X, so consider this like a ballpark PC build that should give us some idea if 60 FPS is possible on the Microsoft console. First up, some words of praise for the PC port. Begins with a shader pre-compilation step, which doesn't take too long and does seem to solve the usual PSO-based stutter struggle inherent to many Unreal Engine games. Next up, the menu screen is really very impressive. A wealth of options are available and field of view omission apart, pretty well featured I'd say. But here's what I really like. At any point in the game you can pause and tweak any settings in real time. Highlight a setting, engage the preview, and you can see exactly how the setting adjusts the scene. Plus you see the performance changes in real time too. It's really neat. Both CPU and GPU scores need to be below 16.7 milliseconds to sustain 60 frames per second. So we've got a very Xbox-like PC here, and we can set up its performance profile like Xbox is out of the box. We can set output resolution on our decidedly mid-range RX 6700 to output 3840 by 2160, 4K. Then we can set dynamic resolution scaling to target 30 FPS. I'm even able to stay at high settings here, and early work on settings comparisons to the console version. Well, we're seeing a mixture of medium and high so far in our testing, but I'm able to run flat out on high settings here. The end result is a game that looks just as fantastic as Xbox, if not more so, with very similar performance. But what about 60 FPS? For this testing, we can only really guess what Ninja Theory itself might try to do if it was so inclined to make a performance mode, but I settled on reducing output resolution to 1440p, moving the DRS target up to 60 frames per second and dropping down to medium settings, which should say still very attractive. Cutscenes can be challenging, dropping into the 50s and sometimes down into the 40s on the most demanding scenes. Gameplay, however, is in the high 50s and often at full 60 frames per second, and this is important as graphics quality settings and resolution are scalable, but CPU performance not so much. The 4800S desktop kit seems to deliver performance in line with a high-end Zen 1 CPU generally, occasionally encroaching into desktop Zen 2 levels. It doesn't have the cache or low latency of desktop Zen 2 chips, but even so, I don't think CPU performance is the problem in hitting 60 frames per second. And I do think on that regard, Series X could probably do it. Based on what we're seeing here though, maybe the dynamic resolution scaler just isn't responsive enough to consistently hit 60 frames per second. Or maybe the lower bounds just isn't low enough. Everything does seem to work a treat at 30 FPS though, at least on this particular GPU. However, there is another problem, traversal stutter. Here I'm comparing runs on my 60 FPS profile against my maxed out 4K DRS 30 FPS capture. At the same point every time you see a stutter like this. Frame times leap to a max 140 milliseconds, an annoying pause at 30 FPS but a massive glitch at 60. It's not a great look for the PC version, but might possibly be improved by a faster CPU. But here's the thing. If we run this sequence on Xbox Series X, it runs at a totally consistent 30 frames per second. No traversal stutter. So let the velocity architecture theories begin now. But here's an intriguing final test. Here I'm using medium settings but with high LOD, high textures and high foliage, which are settings that are confirmed on Series X. Whether I'm at 1080p, 1440p or 4K output, no 60 FPS here. I think the lower bounds on dynamic res is identical for all resolutions, hence the very similar frame rate readout despite very different target resolutions. So the PC version is pretty good, I'd say, based on these first impressions, and we'll have more on this in the fullness of time on more conventional rigs. But for now, I'd say that 60 FPS is theoretically possible on Series X with reduced resolution and effects. But as for a stable 60 FPS, well, that's another thing. Resolution may need to drop very, very low for consistency. And meanwhile, play the game and you'll see that 60 FPS is what you might call a nice to have, but 30 FPS is just fine for this type of experience. Still, the option is there for PC along with so much more, and in that respect, the PC version is well worth checking out. That's all from me on this one. Thanks for watching.